Israel is about to light a signal that could change everything. Imagine with me, right now, leaders in Jerusalem are preparing an event that has never happened before in the nation's entire modern history. Something so grandiose, so loaded with symbolism, that many believe it to be the echo of an ancient prophecy. First detail, September 2025, on a date already set. 100 priests will blow 100 sacred trumpets at the same time in the heart of the holy city. It will not be just a ritual hidden in the temple, but a global broadcast brought to screens around the world. Millions of people will hear that sound live, as if Jerusalem had become a stage for history. Now think, in more than 3,000 years of tradition, Israel has never done anything like this. He has never coordinated a simultaneous ringing. He has never shared such an intimate celebration worldwide. So why now? Why precisely in 2025? What is the agenda behind this unprecedented decision? And here begins the most disturbing part. What if this collective touch is not just a cultural gesture, but a spiritual marker? What if it is the preparation for the scenario described centuries ago? A time of transition where the stage would be set not only for the Messiah, but also for the revelation of the Antichrist. After all, each jubilee, each cycle, has always pointed to something greater. And when such a singular event happens before our eyes, we need to ask ourselves, is it just a ceremony? Or are we facing one of the clearest signs that the prophetic counting of the 7,000 years is reaching its limit? Imagine someone opening the book of Genesis and realizing that there is not only an ancient narrative, but a prophetic code hidden in plain sight. The creation week, with its 6 days of work and 1 day of rest, works as a map that covers 7,000 years of human history. 6,000 years of struggle, sweat, wars, choices, falls, and victories, followed by a 7th millennium of rest, the promised millennium where Christ will reign. It is as if God has set a spiritual timer from the beginning. Now think with me. Isn't it curious that humanity always organizes time in weeks? We worked 6 days and rested 1. This rhythm is not arbitrary. It is a reflection of a larger prophecy. The 7th day, rest, is what we call the Sabbath. But prophetically, this rest points to the day when the Messiah will rule the earth in peace. It's as if each sunset is a silent reminder that the clock is ticking to a future we can't avoid. What's more, this parallel was not tied to the old pages. Several scholars, including the Essenes, already perceived this connection. They saw Creation Week as a perfect model for understanding human history. It is as if each millennium were a chapter in this great narrative. And if we think about it, everything we are experiencing today, from political crises to wars, was already foreseen in this divine compass. History is not a coincidence, it has structure. To make this more tangible, imagine life as a racing championship. Each turn represents a millennium. The first 6 laps are marked by sweat, fatigue, endurance. But the last lap, the 7th, is the victory, the rest. This is when the rapture and the trumpets fulfill their role, announcing that the time has come for Christ's rule. This is not just a theological detail, but a strategy of preparation for practical life. Those who understand the time in which they live know where to invest energy. And how does this impact daily life? Simple. If we are in the final minutes of the 6th day, then each choice gains eternal weight. Reading the Bible is not just tradition, it is aligning with the countdown. Praying is not just consolation, it is connection with the Creator's plan. Even everyday acts, such as forgiving someone or adjusting priorities, become part of preparing for this 7th millennium. It's like tidying up the house to receive an important visitor, except that here, the guest is the King of Kings. Therefore, when we look at the days of creation, we are not only remembering a past, but projecting ourselves into an inevitable future. This is the thread that connects the beginning to the end, and it already gives indications that the project hidden in Genesis is much bigger than we imagine. If the creation week already shows us a 7,000-year-old prophetic clock, what about the hidden design that rests between the lines of Genesis? It is not just about God creating heavens, seas, and animals, but about Him drawing a complete model of all human history. Every detail, every sequence carries an echo that crosses generations. The 6 days of work point to ages of effort, while the seventh day reveals the millennium, the rest that mankind has longed for since the fall. Notice how this hidden project goes beyond a simple report. It's like an architectural plan. Those who glance only see scribbles, but the engineer sees an entire city there. In the same way, Genesis is not just memory, it is prophecy in narrative format. Each "let there be light" and each "bring forth the earth" are like prophetic markers that anticipate not only creation, but also redemption, judgment, and restoration. That is why ancient scholars, including the Essenes, devoted so much time to these standards. They believed that here were the cycles that would govern not only Israel, but the entire world. It's like studying economics. Graphs may seem boring, but when you understand cycles, you know how to predict crises and opportunities. Genesis works like this: a map of history revealing from the fall of Adam to the triumph of the Messiah. Want a practical example of how to apply this? Think about organizing your own time. If God structured history in cycles, why not apply this to your routine? Establishing periods of work, rest, and preparation is a reflection of the divine pattern itself. The same principle that points to the rapture and the sounding of the trumpets can help someone organize their finances, take care of their health, and even plan their family more wisely. And of course, all of this gains more strength when we remember that nothing in Genesis is random. The seventh day, for example, was not only a rest for God, but a sign for us that history has a definite destiny. We are not walking at random, but within an already devised plot. This changes the way we see life. Each choice carries an eternal weight. This hidden project opens the way to something even deeper, the interpretation that, for God, a single day can be equivalent to 1,000 years. This is where we enter into the principle revealed in 2 Peter 3:8, which connects human time to divine time, broadening our view of the prophetic clock. When Peter writes that one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day, he is not throwing poetry into the air. He's giving the key to understanding the prophecy that connects Genesis to the future of humanity. This principle is like a translation code. What seems like a simple day of creation actually represents an entire millennium within the divine plan. Thus, the week of creation becomes a 7,000-year timeline, where each era of humanity is millimetrically marked. It is as if God were saying, "My time does not run like yours." We count days with clocks and calendars. He counts with ages and purposes. For him, what for us is an eternity of waiting is only the blink of an eye. This teaches us something practical: patience. How many times does someone give up on a dream because it doesn't happen in 3 months? But if we understand God's timing, we learn to wait. It's like planting a tree. It's no use pulling out the leaves every day to see if it has grown. The process requires cycles. This key also helps us interpret the moment in which we live. If each day of creation is equivalent to 1,000 years, and we have already traveled 6 days, then we are in the final moments of the 6th millennium. That is, the prophetic line points to the millennium of Christ just ahead. This puts us in a period of intense preparation, in which the trumpets already echo on the horizon, warning that the rapture is approaching. The Essenes also relied on this reading. They looked at the cycles and understood that God acts within a precise timetable, even when man thinks everything is out of control. It's like watching the moon. It may seem unpredictable, but it is enough to know the cycle to predict each phase. This is how the history of humanity works. It is not chaos, it is a symphony ruled by the Creator. And here's the most challenging point: if God tells the story in thousands of years, how are we dealing with our few years of life? If a day is equivalent to 1,000 years, what are 70 or 80 years in the face of that? It's almost nothing. But paradoxically, it is in this almost nothing that we decide everything about eternity. Each choice now echoes forever. This perspective prepares us to see history in blocks, in distinct eras that connect with each other, revealing that each generation has a specific role within the divine plan. And that brings us to the next step, the division of human history into ages, a prophetic mosaic that shows how each period fulfills a piece of the promise revealed from the beginning. If God's timing can be translated into 1,000-year cycles, it makes sense to view the history of mankind divided into ages. Each one corresponds to a day of creation, as if it were a chapter within the 7,000-year book. The first day goes from Adam to Noah, marked by the fall, the growth of wickedness, and the judgment of the flood. It was the period when light and darkness began to be separated, not only in the physical world, but also in the spiritual. On the second day, from Noah to Abraham, we see humanity reorganized after the flood. It is the era of peoples spreading, forming cultures and identities. Here appears the Tower of Babel, a symbol of the human attempt to create a kingdom without God. This period recalls the parting of the waters in creation, peoples and nations being divided, setting the stage for the call of one man, Abraham, who would become the father of faith. The third day, from Abraham to Moses, brings the promise of the land and the formation of the chosen people. It is like dry land rising from the waters. During this period, the roots of faith were planted, and Israel was born as a nation, carrying the seed of the promise of the Messiah. It is at this point that we see the first direct connection between God's design and the hope of humanity. The fourth day, from Moses to Christ, is illuminated by the brightness of the stars created on that day. Just as the sun and moon ruled the heavens, the law and prophets ruled Israel. This period clearly points to the arrival of the Savior. It is as if each psalm, each prophet, each feast were a lighted lantern leading the people to the coming of Jesus. The fifth day, which represents the era of the early church, shows the multiplication of life. Just as the seas overflowed with fish and the birds filled the heavens, the gospel message began to spread throughout the world. It is a time of explosive growth, in which the breath of the Spirit impelled the disciples to take the good news to the ends of the earth. And finally, we come to the sixth day, which connects directly to our time. Just as on the sixth day God created man, this age is marked by the height of mankind, science, technology, empires, and conquests. But it is also the time of the deepest fall, where human arrogance challenges the Creator. We are living in the last hours of this sixth millennium, about to enter the seventh, the millennium of Christ, where rest will finally come. If we already understand that each day represents a millennium, then it is clear that we are in the final minutes of the sixth day. It is as if the clock is about to strike midnight, announcing the beginning of the promised rest. The world we see today, with wars, economic crises, and moral collapses, is exactly the scenario expected for the end of this cycle. The trumpets of time are already sounding, calling for preparation for what comes next. This sixth millennium reflects the boldness of man in wanting to rule without God. It is enough to look at the nations and realize how much humanity places itself at the center. Science elevated to the condition of faith, ideologies taking the place of truth, and even the very notion of right and wrong being relativized. It is the height of human arrogance, but also the confirmation of prophecy revealed since Genesis. The closer we get to the end, the clearer the evidence becomes that the countdown is real. Think of it like a marathon. The runner, in the last kilometers, is already exhausted, but it is exactly there that he knows he cannot stop. The same happens with humanity. We live in times of spiritual fatigue, but also of greater expectation. The rapture draws near, and the promised rest is just ahead. This is not a call to fear, but to hope, the assurance that the seventh millennium will bring the reign of the Messiah. It is no coincidence that even natural cycles point to this pattern. We worked 6 days and rested on the seventh. We plant for 6 years and the land rests on the seventh. These cycles are divine reminders that human history would also culminate in a rest. The difference is that this will not be just an ordinary day, but a period of 1,000 years in which justice and peace will rule. This means that the choices of now carry even more weight. Every act of kindness, every prayer, every reconciliation becomes part of the preparation for this time. Ignoring this reality is like a farmer who knows the harvest is coming, but doesn't plant anything. We are faced with the opportunity to align our lives with the eternal calendar, so as not to be caught off guard when the trumpets sound, and it is precisely at this point that a fascinating question arises. How were some ancient peoples already aware of these cycles? Who were these men who, even before the modern era, were talking about the 7,000 years, about jubilees, and about the reign of the Messiah? The answer lies in the timeline preserved by the Essenes, who saw history as a great mosaic of interconnected eras. The Essenes, that isolated community at Qumran, had a vision of time that is impressive to this day. They didn't see the years just as numbers, but as pieces of a prophetic puzzle. To them, each 7-year cycle, called the Shemitah, and each 50-year cycle, the Jubilee, were signs that God set specific dates for deliverance, restoration, and even the manifestation of the Messiah. It was not superstition, it was spiritual calendar reading. Imagine living in a desert, away from the hustle and bustle of the cities, and dedicating your life to copying scrolls, observing cycles, and waiting for divine intervention. This was the daily life of the Essenes. They believed that the history of humanity did not walk loosely, but followed a line defined by the Creator. Each cycle of preparation pointed to something greater. Each repetition confirmed that the end was approaching. It is as if they were counting down the days to the blowing of the trumpets that would announce the time of the kingdom. These men had one conviction: the week of creation was a prophetic model that was repeated in the great cycles of history. And they didn't just believe it, they did. When they spoke of ages, they spoke of 2,000-year blocks, aligned with God's plan since Genesis. For them, the world was not a chaos without direction, but an architected project with a beginning, middle, and end. An interesting detail is that the Essenes considered time as something sacred. They saw not only days running by, but opportunities for redemption. For them, understanding cycles was also adjusting life. It is like someone who organizes their finances not only for the present, but to ensure the future of the family. Likewise, each gap year and each jubilee served as a reminder that life needs to be aligned with God's calendar. And the most curious thing is that, even though they are a small, isolated community, and often forgotten by history, they preserved one of the most powerful keys to prophecy. By interpreting the cycles, they connected past, present, and future in a single narrative. This realization anticipated not only the first coming of Christ, but also points to the millennium of rest to come. This timeline of the Essenes opens a fascinating door for us. How did these cycles of Shemitah and Jubilee become prophetic markers of liberation, forgiveness, and restoration? This is exactly what brings us to the next point: the profound significance of the Sabbath cycle and the Jubilee in the construction of the divine plan. The cycle of Shemitah was simple in practice, but profound in meaning. 6 years of work and the 7th of rest, both for the land and for the people. It wasn't just about farming. It was a living lesson in trust in God. And when the Jubilee arrived, in the 50th year, everything gained even more strength. Debts were forgiven, slaves freed, and property returned. It was the greatest symbol of restoration that anyone could experience. Imagine the joy of a family that, after decades of struggle, saw their lands returning, or of a slave who at the sound of the Jubilee trumpet returned home as a free man. This was the power of the prophecy written on the calendar, a reminder that the Lord is the true owner of time, land, and history. These cycles were not just laws, but prophetic rehearsals of what is yet to come. When we look at this model, it is clear that God always wanted to teach that life is not an endless accumulation of fatigue. There are pauses, there are restarts, there is forgiveness. The Shemitah showed rest, the Jubilee showed liberation. Together, they pointed to the great final Jubilee, the rapture, and to the millennium, when all creation will enter into its full restoration. It was as if each cycle was a play rehearsed for centuries to announce the final act. In practice, this pattern can inspire even today. How many people live mired in debt, bitterness, or guilt that they carry for years? The principle of the Jubilee teaches us to let go, to forgive, to start over. Imagine applying this to your daily life, forgiving someone who owes you something, zeroing out an emotional account, or even giving your mind a rest instead of living in constant anxiety. This is bringing prophecy into real life. The Essenes saw in these cycles a key to understanding the times of the Messiah. They knew that the Jubilee was not only about land and slaves, but about the liberation of the soul, the preparation for the kingdom to come. For them, each cycle was a reminder that God was guiding history toward eternal rest. And it is exactly within this perspective that an even bolder vision emerges. The division of human history into 4 great eras of 2,000 years each, forming a direct line from Adam to the millennium. This was the reading of the Essenes, and it connects each cycle to the great panorama of humanity. The Essenes not only saw smaller cycles, but dared to divide all of history into 4 great eras of 2,000 years each. For them, this was the mosaic that showed from Genesis to the millennium. The first age was called the Age of Chaos, from the time of Adam to Abraham. It was the period when humanity spread, but also sank into rebellion. From Eden to the flood, and from Babel to the first nations, it was the time of spiritual disorder and the search for direction. The second age was the Torah age, which runs from Abraham to Jesus. Here, the law was given, the prophets spoke, and Israel received their identity as a chosen people. It is at this time that the Shemitah and Jubilee cycles became part of the culture, showing that God not only guided spiritually, but also marked time. This age was like preparing the ground for the arrival of the Messiah. The third age, the Age of Grace, begins with Jesus and continues until his second coming. It is the time when the gospel message spread to all nations, fulfilling what was prophesied. Here, deliverance is not only from land or debt, but from the bondage of sin. This is the era in which we live, marked by advances, challenges, and the expectation of the rapture and the sounding of trumpets. And then will come the fourth age, the Age of Kingdom. That will be the millennium, when Christ will reign over all the earth. The Essenes believed that this period would be the ultimate fulfillment of all cycles, the universal Jubilee, when the entire creation would be restored. Imagine 1,000 years without wars, without corruption, without pain. This was the vision that sustained his hope in the midst of the Qumran desert. What is impressive is the precision of this division. When we look back, each of these eras really fits into the great milestones of biblical history. It doesn't seem like a coincidence, but a carefully drawn script. And the fact that we are already at the end of the third era further reinforces the need for preparation. The next act is inevitable, and this is precisely where a precious detail comes in. A manuscript discovered among the Qumran scrolls, known as 11Q Melchizedek, which spoke of the coming of the Messiah in a Jubilee year, connecting Isaiah to Jesus' own mission. This text shows how even the first coming of Christ was within this prophetic calendar. Among the Qumran scrolls, one of the most fascinating is the so-called 11Q Melchizedek. In this manuscript, the Essenes interpreted Isaiah 61, 1-2 as a messianic prophecy that would be fulfilled in a Jubilee year. They believed that the Messiah would arise to proclaim deliverance and restore all things. exactly at the time marked by the divine calendar. This detail shows that they did not expect a savior at random, but within precisely calculated cycles. Imagine their expectation when they read and copied that text, believing that they were close to seeing the Messiah with their own eyes. To them, each cycle was like the ticking of a sacred clock. The Jubilee, with its trumpet of deliverance, was not just a social event, but a rehearsal of what was to come in salvation history. It is as if every 50 years is a reminder that the final great Jubilee is yet to come, bringing eternal rest. This scroll also connects the figure of Melchizedek to the plan of redemption. To the Essenes, he was a prophetic type of the Savior, one who would bring deliverance and judgment. This reading showed how they understood that history did not run wild, but was tied to a detailed plan of 7,000 years, from Genesis to the millennium. Interestingly, when Jesus begins his ministry, he exactly reads Isaiah 61 in the synagogue, Luke 4:16-21, and declares that that word was being fulfilled there before everyone. That is, the Messiah appeared exactly within the expected pattern, in a Jubilee cycle. It was as if the trumpet sounded again, but this time not only announcing liberation from physical slavery, but from all the spiritual slavery of humanity. This shows that the calculations of the Essenes were not far from reality. On the contrary, they were in tune with God's timing. They pointed to a Messiah who would come in Jubilee, and Jesus confirmed this reading with his own life and ministry. It was like seeing an age-old prophecy materializing before our eyes. But if Christ's first coming has already been marked by this calendar, what prevents us from believing that his second coming will also follow the same pattern? This is the provocation that brings us to the next point: how the first coming of Jesus confirms the perfect alignment of prophecy and opens up the expectation for future fulfillment. When Jesus stands in the synagogue of Nazareth and reads Isaiah 61, he not only declares the beginning of his ministry, he confirms the accuracy of the divine calendar. It was a Jubilee year, just as the 11Q Melchizedek scroll pointed out. There, before everyone's eyes, the prophecy took shape, and the Messiah began the mission of liberation, not only social or political, but spiritual. It was as if the trumpets of the Jubilee sounded definitively, marking the beginning of the restoration. This detail is not small. It shows that the first coming of Christ did not happen by chance, but within a determined, calculated, and expected time. If the beginning of his ministry was timed so carefully, what about his second coming? This gives us the certainty that the same calendar is still in operation, leading history to the rapture and then to the millennium of rest. Notice how this changes the way you look at the Christian life. It is not about living adrift, but about walking within a countdown. Each generation has been given a piece of this great chronometer, and ours is the one approaching the last seconds of the 6th day. Thus, living today requires even more preparation, for the King will return on time without delays or advances. And the beauty of this lies in the fact that Jesus has already fulfilled the first part perfectly. He entered the calendar of the Essenes in the Jubilee and announced freedom to the captives. Now the next act is just as certain as the first, his return. It is as if the past were concrete proof that the future is guaranteed. The same God who timed jubilees is the one who times the day when Christ will return. Thus, we are not only talking about theory, but about practical life. If we know the clock is ticking, we need to adjust priorities. Forgive offenses, align life with the Word, live in holiness. Not because it is beautiful or convenient, but because we are on the verge of hearing the final sound of the trumpets. Rest is not a distant dream. It is a promise counting down, and this presents us with an inevitable choice: ignore the signs or embrace the preparation for the encounter with the Lord. The world runs after riches and distractions, but the wise read the cycles and understand. We are about to live the final fulfillment of what began in Genesis, and which will end in the great millennium of Christ. Do you realize the weight of it all? We are facing signs that cannot be ignored. The world is not only experiencing political crises, wars, and instability. It is being prepared before our eyes for something far greater, the final stage of prophecy. The question is, will you watch with folded arms, or will you align yourself with God's plan? What if the trumpets sound tomorrow? What if the rapture happens while you're still putting off decisions that should be made today? How many are still living as if they had all the time in the world, without understanding that we are already in the last moments of the 6th millennium? Stop and reflect. What do you need to change right now? Your spiritual life, your family, your priorities. Are you really preparing to meet Christ, or are you caught up in the distractions of this system that organizes itself to receive the Antichrist? I want to provoke you not to let this pass as another piece of information. Turn this alert into attitude. Turn to God, immerse yourself in the Word, seek the Lord in prayer. Ask yourself, if all that has been revealed so far is fulfilled before my eyes, how shall I live from now on? And if this content made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Share, comment below, what is your perception of these signs? And let's together form a community of people attentive to the prophetic clock. Oh, and don't forget, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell, because the next content will open your eyes even more to understand the time we are living in. And you don't want to be left out of this awakening.